a person feels that he's a right to see the other person in a negative light because he wasn't accorded the acknowledgement he should have. He was offended, he was embarrassed, or an opportunity which should have been offered to you was not offered to you. Therefore, you have a claim and you justify it, or it touches you in a bad way, and therefore, when you think about that person, right away something negative comes to your mind and to your emotion, and you will say something negative. When that person is being spoken about, you will say, by the way, something negative, due to the way that person touched you. Or we speak about revenge or harboring ill feeling. What do most people harbor ill feeling? Something which is really significant, or something which was literally something which the person would admit afterwards it was all ego driven. That's what it was. And the vast majority of one's failings, spiritual failings between man and man, is due to this. I'm not speaking a person starving and he justifies stealing because he has to survive. I'm not talking about that. It's because I think I have a right. Whether your rights against society, people have so much, you feel you've always gotten the short end of the stick. Therefore, you justify stealing. But you think to yourself, what is it going to cost you? But even without there maybe it's a little more difficult. But in most situations, what drives the person to justify all the misbehavior, speaking out of turn, saying what you shouldn't say, withholding favors, which is classified as revenge or harboring a feeling, is because we're talking about minutia. It's foolishness. It's nonsense. But ultimately, in a lifetime, all this stuff accumulates. When it accumulates, a person has a serious negative record. And therefore, when the claim comes against him, the day of reckoning comes, it's going to be a heavy, heavy claim. I'll give you an example. We speak about carcinogens. Person eats. Person has a little amount, doesn't affect him that much. But we speak about cumulative over years. You eat foods, you breathe, you drink water. And the water has certain impurities in it. So initially, it doesn't compromise your system. But if you ingest enough of that and you inhale enough of that, ultimately, God forbid, it's going to compromise your immune system and a person will die from it or be impaired very seriously. It's the same thing. He offended me. He didn't give me the aliyah. He didn't call me. He didn't send me the New Year's card. When I saw him, he didn't acknowledge me. He should have given me the deal. I didn't get the job. I thought I was as qualified as the other. The other person, if not for him, I would have the position. Most cases is this. If you go and ride down the elevator in any office building, sometimes you hear conversations between people. It's always speaking about someone else. Always this one, either it's a co-worker or it's the person who oversees them. Something, never anything positive. Always a criticism, a claim, this and that, whatever. What's it all about? Well, that's all you hear. Why? Well, I left early, which I shouldn't have, and he gave me what he reprimanded me. He shouldn't have. He shouldn't have. Therefore what? Therefore you bear a grudge against him and you do whatever you can to undermine his position. Okay? But this is not uncommon. Most people, that's the way they behave. So Chafetz Chaim goes to explain this with an allegory. A person's a miser. And he feels, and he's very chintzy on what he spends. And he goes, and to be able to succeed in business, person has to invest. Things don't happen by themselves. You have to advertise properly. You have to have a certain type of office if you have certain types of clients who are going to come to the office. But the person, his miserly essence overrides. He doesn't see the value of spending, because spending means having less, but he doesn't see the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, so to say, that by spending you can have more. His miserliness, his not willing to let go, doesn't. Okay? His business is not doing well. So now it comes to his own diet. He normally ate healthy, but he says, you know something? I got to look at my bottom line. It's not where it is. I'm going to, you know something? I'm going to cut back. Only can eat, spend on 2/3 of what I need for my nourishment. We'll see how it goes. Does well. He's living for a month at 2/3 of what he normally eats, and he feels fine. To the person is a miser, he says, you know, this plays right into his miserliness. He says, you know, maybe I'll cut it down 50%. And he goes for another month. Feels a little lethargic, a little slow, but why not? All that matters is I'll be saving a few silver slivers of silver, a few coins. And he says, you know, it's not bad, but you know, my account is growing. You know, years ago, when we were young, when you went to school, there was a savings bank on the Lower East Side. It was called Bowery Savings Bank. So they would teach the children how to bank, to save money. And every week we were told to bring in $1, and there was you would have a bank book, and the teacher, everybody had their bank books there, and there'd be like a leather pouch, which the teacher would go fill out a deposit slip, and you would give your bank book, and you'd get your bank book back, and every week you saw another $1 on that in the bank book. And by the end of the year, you could have $30, $40, $50 saved over a year. And they taught children how to save. But a person who's a miser, he saves at the expense of his own health. It reaches a point, he's already not feeling well. He's feeling a little unbalanced. He goes to the doctor. Doctor says, you know something? I'll tell you your problem is you're malnourished. You have to eat more. But you're still okay. Your life's not in danger. The miser hears that. The doctor says it's going to pass. You're okay. So what does he do? He even cuts back further. It reaches a point. He really feels like he's fading out. Emergency, goes to the doctor. Doctor says, what happened? He says, I'm embarrassed to tell you the truth. I'm such a miser and so foolish. I allowed my miserliness compromise on my health, even to the point where I'm putting my life in jeopardy. So the doctor says, you know, I have a certain medication. It costs a fortune. He says, let me ask you, all that you gained by compromising on your health, all these months, what did you gain? He says, about $200. He says, this medication costs you $1,000. That's what it cost. And even if you take this medication, it's not guaranteed you're going to recover. At best, you only regain 50% of your health. But if you wouldn't have been the miser initially, you'd be fully healthy. That's what doctor says. Otherwise, if you don't take this medication, pay for it, you're going to die. But he's pained. So the doctor says, you're a fool. You saved yourself a few $100s and it costs you thousands. And at the end of the day, where are you? You're way behind the 8 ball, way behind. A person every day, he behaves a certain way because he didn't give me the deal. He didn't say good morning to me. He didn't send me the New Year's card. He didn't this, he didn't that. And because of that, what do? You go and you do terrible things. You say things, you steal, you embarrass, or you withhold favors, which you could have helped another person. And you start adding up for what? It's all minutia. You made a few bucks, so to say, a few copper coins, which are nearly worthless. But look what kind of debt you created over here. For what? And after everything's said and done, in your lifetime, you can't even clean up. Who knows what has to be after you die? The price that you're going to have to pay for this. So the Chafetz Chaim says, if you put things in perspective and you realize the smallness of people, of each person, we're not passing judgment on anyone else. To speak to ourselves and make an evaluation. Why am I behaving this way? Why do I feel this way towards this person? Why? For what reason? Because I was in shul and I should have gotten the aliyah. He didn't give me the aliyah. See, he didn't give you the aliyah. Therefore what? Is he the worst person in the world? And is he really evil? He's not an evil man. It just doesn't justify you should say anything negative about him. Not only doesn't justify because he's not evil, if you really look at it and you speak to anybody else, they'll say, why don't you grow up already? Grow up. That's what they used to tell people. Grow up already, You're 50 years old and you behave like a baby. You're a 50-year-old baby. That's what you are. You've never grown up. You've never matured. Your parents spoiled you rotten and you're still spoiled. But every one of us has this this ego issue that over minor nothings, we go and we behave and we do things which are detrimental to ourselves. That's the Chafetz Chaim. So for a few slivers he says, for a few rubles, what is it costing us? It's costing us a fortune. It's like a person, he goes and he cheats on his taxes. And then he's caught. And there's even a question of a prison sentence. He has to hire a lawyer. It costs him a fortune. And even after the lawyer, what does the lawyer do for him? He avoids the prison sentence. It's not a criminal case, but he has to pay a fortune in what? In penalty. So what he thought he'd save himself on the tax, he's paying multiples of what he thought he saved himself. But that's the way people are. We don't see the liability or the possibility, and for what? You mean, a person you say he wants because he can't make ends meet. Okay, maybe. Most people, they cheat on the taxes or they somehow justify certain things. It's not because they can't put food on the table. That's not the case. If I could have more, why should I have less? That's what it's all about. And if you could somehow not pay the bill, why pay the bill to your vendor, right? I could use that money, but you realize, you owe the vendor the money, and the right things to pay your vendor. You're already late 120 days. He gave you 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. And he doesn't want to give it over to collection because he's a nice person. And he puts you into business because he gave you credit. Is that the way you treat your vendor? But you realize, I also have to live. He's doing well, why shouldn't I do well? But if you think about it, what it's about, your behavior is totally unacceptable. So if a person somehow, as we used to say, why don't you look yourself in the mirror? Take a good look at yourself in the mirror. What you're doing, are you that perfect? Maybe see some of your warts and some of your lacerations and some of your failings. You got to clean up your act. We all have to clean up our act and understand what the cause of that is. And if you understand, it's interesting. Chovos Levavos writes, Duties of the Heart, that if a person would have faith is trust in Hashem, that He makes it happen or not happen. And if He wants it not to happen, you could turn the world over 20 times. It's not happening. And if it's meant to happen, you're going to have what you're supposed to have. He says that kind of person who has the faith and the trust, he can sleep at night. He gets a good night's sleep. He doesn't worry about who's going to take away his business, what he's going to miss, the deal, the opportunity. And some people, they're greed-driven. Why are they greed-driven? Because they feel that unless they take that, somebody's going to take it away from them. And they become totally consumed and subsumed. And people say, that's the way you have to be. That's a role model. What kind of life does the man have? There's a story many years ago, in the especially late 1800s, mid 1800s, early 1900s, the majority of the community in Yerushalayim, even in Israel, most of it was Sephardic Jews, were not Ashkenazi Jews. And there was very little industry or commerce, very little. First of all, if you read about the Chalutzim, when they first came to Israel, they had swamps which were malaria-ridden, where they would die of malaria. What they did when they first came, they had to drain many of the swamps, and many of the land was arid because it was never cultivated, and they gave their lives. Okay, all kinds of Jews went there initially. So how did people, let's say in Yerushalayim, how did they support themselves? Yerushalayim was one big institution. They would have a fundraiser, would travel to Europe, and he would make relationships, invite people to come to visit, wealthy people, and when they would come, they'd give them a tour of the institution called the Jews of Jerusalem, the Ashkenazi community, the Sephardic community, and the person would be touched in a certain way, he would give a substantial donation. You're supporting the institution, and they put up the person's name in the synagogue, in the Base measure, the study hall. Today, the study is on behalf of, in this person's merit. And that's where they raised money, okay? So there was a rabbi, he was a great Torah sage. His name was Reb Shmuel Salant. Reb Shmuel Salant. Because he came from Salant, and he was the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim until the age of 99, for many, many years. When he was about, there's a street in Yerushalayim, Rehov Salant. Rehov Shmuel Salant. The street is called after Reb Shmuel Salant. Besides being a great Torah sage, he was a very wise man. Okay? And the pictures of him. Not a physically large person in every sense of the word, a holy man. And the fundraiser, the executive director of Yerushalayim, he had one of his potential donors come to Yerushalayim, and he wanted to give him a tour of the city. So he wants to introduce him to the chief rabbi, Rabbi Shmuel Salant. So he comes in. Most people in those years, the clothing they wore was threadbare. That was the level of poverty. They weren't a specimen of health. Many of them were malnourished. All kinds of issues there. Yet plagues, diphtheria, cholera. These were like the remnants of the community that survived whatever they went through, whatever they endured. And this young man, maybe in his late 20s, early 30s, is speaking to Reb Shmuel Salant in Torah. And this person comes, this wealthy man, and he's waiting for the exec director, and they're waiting on the side there, and the conversation just keeps going. And this rich man, he's not used to this kind of behavior, this kind of treatment. He's not used to it. It reaches a point, he explodes, and of course he can't say a word to the holy rabbi, but he goes and he reprimands this young man who's speaking to Reb Shmuel Salant, and belittles him, denigrates him, embarrasses him, and treats him and acts to him like he's worthless. Look at the clothing, look what you look like, you're a nothing, what's your worth? I have to wait, where do you have this audacity? And he laces into this young man, and Rabbi Shmuel Salant looks at this rich man with fire in his eyes. He says, who do you think you are? You could take your money, go back to Europe, we don't need your money, you have no merit, you know who this man is, and this and that. And he cut him down to a point. The man regretted he ever opened his mouth. And he walked out, as they used to say, with his tail between his legs. And he drove him out. The executive director doesn't know what to do. This is a potential client over here, supporter. And here the chief rabbi goes in and cuts him down. It's gone. How are we going to support the community? So what does he do? He wants to give him a tour of the community to see who these poverty-stricken people, who they really are. That he saw him in this worthless frame, this person has greatness to him. And he goes one night, and he goes from house to house or apartment to apartment, and looks through the window, sees 10, 12 children sleeping on a mat on the floor together, and how the father lovingly takes care of every one of his children. And before he puts them to sleep, he learns with every one of them. And they have bread and a little oil that they dip the bread in the oil, puts them to sleep. The kids go to sleep hungry. Then the father sits down by the table and studies for the next 3-4 hours throughout the night. This person who has threadbare wardrobe, he himself is malnourished, and he's studying Torah with a glow, with a smile on his face, with a tune. And he goes from house to house, and he sees this repeated continuously. So all of a sudden he says to this person, do you think this person really is happy? Do you think he's content? He says, yes. And what about you? He says, I got so many things on my mind. The deal I didn't do, the deal I lost, the deal that's coming up. I don't have a moment's peace. These people, they have such serenity in their lives. They have such pleasure from their children. Such nachas. So he says, now you understand what the chief rabbi said to you. You have no right to open your mouth. And the man truly now understood how ugly and how shameful his behavior was. He goes back to the chief rabbi. He begs for forgiveness. He calls the young man in, who he embarrassed, who he belittled, who he denigrated. He asked forgiveness from him, and he saw he had true remorse. Whatever it was, at the end of the day, he gave more than he would ever give. But again, what's it all about? Do you know who I am? Do you know what I am? Do you know what I know? Do you know therefore what? Person comes to me. Do you know I own half of Park Avenue? So I said to him, are you putting money in my pocket? I'm not putting money in my pocket. It's irrelevant who you are. What do you give? Are you so special? Well, do you know I support the cat and dog hospital? I underwrite, with the parks when they're dirty. I have people who are homeless, they clean up, and I give them $1 an hour to clean up. Do you know who I am? Therefore what? It's irrelevant who you are. You have no relevance to my life. What makes you so special? You think you're special? That's your issue. Maybe I don't think you're so special. You live your life, I live my life. I'm not intimidated. I'm not impressed. I always say, why does a person have a superiority complex? Because everybody is intimidating and kowtows to that person who has the superiority complex. If they ignore him, and when he comes in, nobody looks at him, you understand, this guy is going to have a meltdown. Because he only has a superiority complex because people play into his arrogance and how he tries to lord over them. So a person would start realizing the fickleness and the worthlessness. Many people, you say to people, are you really happy? Most people, are not happy. Not happy. Most people are occupied. They like what they do, but are they really happy? As I always said, people live lives of distraction. After they go on the trip, they have their vacation at a 20-star resort within 5 days because they got to get back to work. So they have to, as they work, they're workaholics, they're vacationaholics. Within those 5 days, they got to get it all in because they got to get back. And this repeats itself back and forth until they can't work any longer. Until the guy has a stroke and he's walking around with his hand hanging out of his jacket. And he has somebody walking with him and holding him. And he has, I said, a 15-pronged cane because not many people. Or he has that electric wheelchair that he can even go up a slope and down a slope, up a hill and down a slope. I'm saying most people. How many people are really happy? Why do people need such attention? Why? Because the answer is because they're not happy. Unless they're validated and they get their so-called, they get their acknowledgement, they're not happy. Why? What do I need your praise? What do I need it? Everybody needs some degree of acknowledgement that he exists. Okay, that's understood. But why? Why do I have to say, Mr.? I have to call you third person, Mr. So-and-so. What are you? You're the king? You're the Lord? What are you? But people have that need. Why? Why does a person have to embarrass his secretary and cut her down and verbally abuse her? Why? Because if I'm the boss, I have a right to do that. People feel they're justified. But if you really think about it, many years ago, I heard from my Rosh Hashanah, there was a certain person in Israel. He was a substantial Talmid Chacham, and he had diabetes. So in Yiddish, they call diabetes a light from zucker. He suffers from sugar. He has a sugar issue. That's what they used to call it, diabetic. And when he went into his when he was in his diabetic fit, he was not, literally, you couldn't deal with the man. He was so agitated, you wouldn't want to be around him at all. When he was having his diabetic fit. So in those days, I don't know what they took insulin, what they did for it, I'm not sure. So my Rosh Hashanah told me, when people around him, they said, but you realize he's having a diabetic fit. It's not his fault. It's not his fault. He says, it may not be his fault, but why should they be abused? It's two separate things. You got a problem. Your problem doesn't have to become the whole world's problem. In that way, lock him away in a room, let him be there. You have a problem with an ego, don't take it out on everyone else. I don't have to validate you. But most people, all these issues we're talking about right now, I didn't get the aliyah. You didn't say good morning to me. You took the deal from me. You beat me on the position. Whatever it is, we played golf. You had a higher score than I had. When you should have picked up the tab and you didn't pick up the tab. Whatever it is, all this kind of stuff, all this nonsense. But this generates and drives all behavior which is not acceptable. That's the Beinod Mechaber. That's between man and man. Look at it, what's going to cost you. It's like the person who was a miser and he compromised on his nourishment, and at the end of the day, what did he save himself? Pennies compared to what it'll take him to recover. You know, when Chazal tell us, Ezo Chochem Arosa Nolad, who is the wise man, the one who sees the consequences, the repercussions, the ramifications of his actions? You truly have to be wise. It's not simple to be wise. Most people, they don't see beyond their noses. That's unfortunate. That's the thing. And therefore, people always mess up and they fail. They only see beyond, if they are wise, what relates to their physicality and their ego. They don't miss a beat. But outside of that, they always miss it. Blind spots, literally, they don't even notice it. You know, many years ago, I had a person, he was a Russian, and he grew up before Glasnost in Russia. So it was really he grew up in an atheistic society. So he asked me that people who, the environment, the education, there was no trace of God. How do you hold these people accountable? How these people, you can't blame them. They weren't permitted even to see God. So how do you expect them to believe in God? So what I said was, what I explained to him, this person became an observant Jew when he came to the United States. He was a CPA, he was a smart person, a good person. So I said to him, I told him the allegory which was given by Rebbe Chana Wasman Zechat Tzarech Levrocha. He was murdered by the Nazis, where he said, you know, the story with the Rembrandt. It wasn't really a Rembrandt. You look at this existence. You look at the universe. You look at everything being so perfect and exact. There's nothing that's not provided for. Did this come about by itself? The answer is people don't think about it. But if you think about it, you focus about it, it's impossible to believe otherwise. And it's not because they're so into evolution in Russia, communist Russia. That wasn't it. People don't think about it. But if you stop and take a good look, 3 steps back and look at the world, it's not possible to believe that this happened by itself. Impossible. And the more educated you are and the more you understand, even more so. So why don't people see it? Why? And God created people as intelligent beings that they could have this takeaway. So if they could have why don't they have the takeaway? Now, a person who has tremendous nerve endings in his hands, so he's able to detect things which most people can't. But let's say he goes and does manual labor, mortar and brick, and he actually gets his hands calloused. Now, what originally, before his hands were calloused, what he's able to detect and feel, he can't feel it any longer. Because now it's calloused. Or he's actually destroyed, due to the manual labor, he destroyed some of those nerve endings. Therefore, he doesn't have the sensitivities. Now, the Torah is made up of 2 parts, between man and man and God. A person lives in Russia, and he works in a factory. It was known you can't survive with what they paid you unless somehow you stole. You had to steal. You had to lie. You had to cheat. And it encouraged this kind of behavior because of just communism in terms of what it was. If you were, the average citizen was low man on the totem pole. And therefore, they all felt they were victimized. They couldn't say much because if you said too much, you paid the price. But everybody, and therefore that drove all the illegal behavior. A lot of illegal stuff. But you realize, because you don't get paid enough, does that justify you take the plumbing out of the factory? Or stealing, or cheating? It may not. So if circumstance causes a person to become a thief and a liar and a cheat, what does that do to a person? You have perfect nerve endings. Your mind has clarity. All of a sudden now, you distorted everything due to your misbehavior. Because if you behave properly, you walk that straight path, you see everything. You go into the ditches and you're subterranean, what do you see? You can't see above the ditch. You're below the ditch. So if you're in the trenches, stealing, lying, cheating, for the sake of survival, doesn't make a difference. How do you accept to see? You can't see the sun. You take what you steal, you go into a dark cave. You don't know whether it's day or night. Because what you stole, you have to actually consume in the recesses of the dark cave. But if a person, so again, everybody in life has opportunities where we could have seen it right. We chose, for whatever reason, to justify to do it differently. I can't survive unless I lie and cheat and steal. Okay, that's what it is. But factually, if you really understand that maybe even so you shouldn't, then you see it right. Because God created a person with a sensibility, with nerve endings, that when you see truth, you recognize truth. But if you go and you destroy all that ability because you're totally occupied in things which are the antithesis of truth, you're not going to notice truth. Because if you steal and you justify it and you believe that's truth, it's how you're supposed to recognize what truth is. You'll never know what truth is. That's what I told him. It's the same thing. In our day and age, there's enough affluence today that nobody's starving. Nobody's starving unless he has an issue, whatever the issue is. If that's the case, what is it all today? It's all driven by ego. It's always ego, but even today more so. I should have. He didn't listen to my opinion. I believe things should be different. Since when are you a policymaker? Well, I think so. But again, you listen to it sometimes, it's so foolish and so insane what people base their perspectives on and justifications. It's not to be believed. Thank God, as I always say, thank God we have a God. Thank God, you should thank God that if you understand that there is a Torah and there's a script and there is something we live within certain parameters, and allows us to see the light above the trench. And the more we appreciate it, we want more of it. But it's all proper behavior. Because the Torah is not only eat this or don't eat that, or this time or that time. It's a perspective, it's a sensitivity. It's between man and God. And when it all comes together, then with whatever you're endowed with, your God-given endowment, you see clearly. You see, everything's magnified. Truth is magnified. But if you don't go in that direction, as I said, if everything which is untruth is truth, how are you supposed to recognize truth? You'll never get there. They used to say, in life you got to be lucky. You'd have to be lucky. It's interesting. A person is born in an impoverished state. Parents don't have anything. They can't even. But everybody in life, within his parameters, has to make his choice. A person born into a wealthy family, he has his script that he has to live by. It's a different dimension of choice. The poor man person's born unhealthy. Person's born handicapped. Every person has his personal script, tailor-made life. You live within this, and within that you have choice. And you could succeed no less than the wealthy man, no less than the poor man, no less than the middle of the road man. Everybody has that ability within his own context to succeed and see it right. It may be more difficult, but you know something? Lefum Tzaragra, the challenge makes it that the accomplishment is greater. That's what it is. As I say in life, if you have role models or you have people take you under their wing and they could give you direction, that person's the luckiest. I told you, I once had not going to mention a name, somebody once brought me to a friend of his. And this man at the time, this man was an Israeli, came to the United States, had no children, married. And the man at that time was worth close to $1 billion. Every other day, he was another lawsuit over a takeover. That's the type of life he lived. He had a chauffeur at the top line Mercedes. He wore a pistol. He had a pistol permit. He prided himself that the watch he wore was $25, and the suit didn't cost him more than $200. And when his chauffeur would drive the car, he lived in Jersey, not far from Englewood, a little further up the Palisades. He would walk behind the car. That if he didn't have to go in that car, he didn't go in the car. And this person was a good friend of his from his days when he wasn't wealthy. Wanted me to meet him. He says, "You never know. You may be able to have an impact. It's a shame. He's leaving all his money to hospitals. That's what he's leaving his money to." Okay, so I go to him, and I said to him, we began the conversation, and I said to him, you have the best quality soil. You have the best quality seed. I said, what do you plow? What do you plow before you sow? Because if the seed is embedded in the ground and you cover it over time, it will take root. It'll germinate and take root. But let's say you leave that seed on the surface and you don't embed it in the ground. There's no connection to the seed in the ground. The wind comes, blows it away, it's gone. That seed will not even, its potential will not be touched, and the earth will not give forth its bounty. I said, you know something? I believe. I said, why am I meeting you? I have no relevance to you. You're a man, you're a Jew, you don't believe in much, and somehow I'm here, we're speaking. You never know. This may be your first and last opportunity to make a choice. So my good advice to you is, whatever we discuss, just keep it in mind and reflect on it. You choose to throw it away, that's your business. But factually, it may be your last chance. And if it is your last chance, you better really focus on it and listen to it well. That's what I told him. I don't think I made any impression on him. Maybe he saw, he's a smart guy. He's this, he's that. He's not intimidated by me, although I have a pistol under my jacket. But it's okay. Didn't make a difference. And this guy didn't even have a dog. Could you imagine? Not even a dog. Because he's leaving his money to hospitals. Hospitals for people, not cat and dog hospitals. That's the type of guy he was. We have the 13 attributes of mercy. One of the attributes is over al pesha. A person is willing to look away. Willing, even when you have a claim, you're willing, it's called mevatir. You're willing to look away, let it go, let it go. So if a person is conditioned, even when sometimes he has really a valid claim, a person had no right to embarrass him. That person embarrassed you. Didn't have a right. You know something? To get consumed, like people, they live principles. And they're willing to die for principles. You know something? We don't live in a principled society. As they say, it's a voice, we used to say it's a voice in the wilderness. But what are you giving your life for principles? You want to live the principle, live it. But to impress it on society, your principle, what's the point? You're wasting your life, wasting your time. So a person, even when he has a claim, what do I gain by having the claim? I will not live it down. I will not let it go. I will, and by not letting, what are you accomplishing? Nothing. And you have a valid claim. If you're willing to let go, God says, as I have a claim against you, measure for measure, as you let go, I will let go. It's phenomenal, has phenomenal value. Because as the Chafetz Chaim writes, the Rambam writes, who's classified as a tzaddik? If the majority of your actions are classified as positive, as meritorious. Russia, if the majority of your actions are classified as negative. Now, what's positive, what's negative? What about if you do something positive, but it's deficient, and it's not qualitatively positive? You put on tefillah and your mind was elsewhere. And you didn't put it on for the right reason. You put it on, you had an ulterior motive. And even with the ulterior motive, you weren't focused. You put on tefillin, but qualitatively speaking, what's its value? If this person is a person who lets go, as you have a claim, and you're not that exacting when it comes to other people, Hashem says, you put on tefillin, it's okay. I'm not going to be that exacting. I'm not going to put it under the microscope and evaluate. Is it rated A, B, or C? You put it on, it's something positive. You sin, I understand. Why, what, when. God will give you every benefit of the doubt to let you go. Not to hold you accountable. But a man in life, he lives a life, he wants everything, he wants it to the penny. He wants a pound of flesh or everything. God says, as you want a pound of flesh, I'm going to take a pound of flesh. So even though the majority of your actions may be positive, but once he starts evaluating him, he can whittle it down to what? To it that the majority, it's no longer a majority. Quantitative may be majority, but when you really look at it, it's nothing. It's not that much worth. As a result of that, he advises you strongly, you should live your life, let go. Even when you have a claim, let go. So if a person's conditioned to let go when he has a claim, when he has no claim, there's no question. Of course. So he didn't say good morning to me. When I have a claim, I let go. Forget about it. Let the past be the past. Let's go on with life. So when something is minutia, I come in, somebody's sitting in my seat, and I had to stand. Therefore what? Is it the end of the world? It's not the end of the world. So everything in life is perspective. So if something which is significant, even there you let go, you understand all the other stuff, you just gloss over. It's like water off a duck's back, as they used to say. Nothing. You're unaffected by it. But it's amazing what people get caught on. You walk down the street, you look at a person the wrong way. He says, are you looking at something? Do you want something? You have a problem? You have an issue? Many years ago, if you live out of town people are different than New York, than big town people. So there was a person, the story goes back maybe 50 years ago. This person was married, and he was visiting a Brooklyn community. If out of town, you see anybody on the street, you say good Shabbos, or you say good morning. You don't let a person matter. You say good morning. People are friendly. So he's the first Shabbos. He's in New York. He just got engaged. The story is over 50 years ago. And he's walking in Brooklyn, and he sees a Jew on the street. He says, good Shabbos. This is before people used to say Shabbat Shalom. They said good Shabbos in those days, 50 years ago. So he says to the person, good Shabbos. He says, do I know you? Do you want something from me? You understand? The man wants to be friendly right away. Do you want something? Do I know you? What are you somehow approaching me for? The man wants to be a decent human being. The proper thing is you see somebody, two Jews meet, and you recognize them and you appreciate what I say, good Shabbos. You should have a good day. No, there must be an ulterior motive over here. You don't just say a good day. You understand? This person, people, their minds are so warped and distorted and see it differently. You see it upside down rather than seeing it straight. Why do you suspect the man had that? Well, because I've met many people like that, okay? So I'm saying, if you could see it right and see it correctly, why see it wrongly? So it's all based on a conditioning. That's the way it is. Now he says, if you put a penny in its tzedakah box, it's called charity. We're not talking, years ago there was a person, I mentioned his name. His name was Mike Goldberger. Mike Goldberger, the majority of his family were killed during the Holocaust. And he was from Hungary, he was in a labor camp. And before the war, he was a very learned person. He was about 16 years old. As for a 16-year-old person, he was sent by his parents to have the Jewish education. And the war, unfortunately, actually hurt him. I mean, he remained observant, but certainly he had certain traumatic memories of that time, okay? So when he retired, He lived in Manhattan, and he used to come every day to a class of mine, a Gemara class, advanced Gemara, and he was what we call a kibitzer, right? That word kibitzer, He always liked to say a light word, always had something humorous to say. And he spoke many languages. Factually, when he came to the United States, he lived in Puerto Rico, and he became a very wealthy man. And there wasn't much of a Jewish community in Puerto Rico. But he lived there because he had knitting mills in Puerto Rico. That's what he had. So when he came back to New York, so he spoke Spanish, he spoke Yiddish, he spoke Hungarian, he spoke many languages and English. So he would say, this was his kibitzing, he would say, how do you say 3 coins in a fountain? You throw people 3 coins in a fountain. So people who speak Yiddish, they would try to say it, 3 coins in a fountain. How do you say fountain? How do you say coins? This and that. He says, how you say it? Ausgeworfen the Geld. It's a waste of money. 3 coins in the fountain means you're throwing your money down the sewer. That's what it is. It's waste of money. That's what it is. See, if you put a penny in its tzedakah box, what is that? That's called a mitzvah. You're fulfilling a positive commandment, but it's a penny. Doesn't make a difference. You're doing a mitzvah. It has a phenomenal return. Every mitzvah, the Mishnah tells us in Pirkei Avos, that for a mitzvah you cannot be rewarded in this world because the value, the extent of reward for a mitzvah, all existence is finite, and the value of that goes beyond the finite. Therefore, you can't reward it. So what's the value of putting a penny in a tzedakah box? Okay? But many people put pennies in tzedakah boxes. What about a person does a significant act of chesed? What's its value? Now, so the Chafetz Chaim cites a Zohar. It's phenomenal. The Zohar says, there's a verse in Tehillim, why did God create existence? Why? If God is perfect and absolute, and God needs nothing, what did he create existence for? God needs a world. He needs humanity. Why does he need anything? Somebody has a need. Need means there's a deficiency. But if God is perfect because he's infinite and he has no needs, why did he create existence? If he has no needs, it's a fundamental question. The Ramchal talks about this, Rabbi Lutzato. It's based on a verse in Tehillim, Psalms. Olam chesed yibaneh. That God created existence is God's kindness. Indiscriminate kindness. He wants to give man an opportunity that if he succeeds, he will be the beneficiary of the ultimate, having a relationship with the source of totality, himself. That's the David, Olam chesed yibaneh. Now, when a person does chesed in a significant way, you know what God says? If my children do chesed, where they themselves are in need of chesed, I, who are the master of all chesed, I shouldn't do chesed. So what it does, the terrestrial action activates and ignites a dynamic which chesed to the whole world comes about. So your action, what it generated was untold, unlimited amount of chesed. So not only are you credited for your action, it's what your action causes. And he says they announce in all the heavenly worlds. Today, the patron of the day is Shmerel ben Chaim. He's the patron of the day because he did that. I'll tell you a personal story. I don't tell normally these things about myself. There's a personal story. Friday, one of my sons, there's a free loan fund from a certain yeshiva where he went to. And he was asked many years ago by the head of yeshiva that he should oversee this free loan fund. We'll call it Gemach. It's called the Gemach. Gemil's Chasodim, it's interest-free loans, okay? And it's available for the students and the alumni of this yeshiva. So this person happens to be a Sephardic Jew who borrowed, but they don't lend money to anybody unless you have a guarantor. You have to have a guarantor to borrow from this fund. And the guarantor has to give a check that if the debt is not paid by a certain date, the guarantor's check will be deposited. But before They deposit check. They call the guarantor and they alert him and say, look, by the way, the loan already is overdue a month, 2 months. We want to just inform you. We're depositing a check. Make sure to have money in the account. Because we're depositing a check that you gave, and sometimes they get 2 guarantors. Because what happens if the guarantor is no good, right? So they have 2 guarantors, and that's how you run it responsibly. So my son calls me Friday, and he says he called a certain person, a Sephardic Jew, who happens to be a student of mine, who studied many years ago, very fine guy, and he's the guarantor for this person's loan, another Sephardic Jew. And he calls him, he says, by the way, the man hasn't paid us already 3 months, and we're going to deposit your check. He says, I know the man's. So my son knows this person who owes the money. He says he's a good guy. He has a family. He has 20 jobs, and just can't make ends meet. Even as a child who has needs, and it's cost him extra money for the needs to tend to those needs, whatever it is, and it's really what they call a rachmanis. It's a pitiful situation, and he's just telling me. He didn't tell me who the person was, and the person who's going to pay the loan is a student of mine. I'd say he's about 45 today, 45 years old, a wealthy Syrian, but a good guy, really a good guy. And when I hear things, I'm touched a certain way. So I say to my son, something? I think we could buy diamonds for pennies. That's what I say to him. He says, what do you mean? I said, something? He said to me, my son, that this person, when he spoke to him, he says, when I go, there's a supermarket in Brooklyn, which really, it's cut rate. The person who runs the supermarket makes very little profit. He really wants to help the community to give them the best buys. The best buys so when they shop for Shabbos or whatever it is, they're paying less than retail. He's a good guy, and he said he didn't have $100 to buy Shabbos. That's how bad his situation is. That's what he said to me, my son. And he shared with him. And he told him, I tutor at night and day and this and that. I didn't have $100 to pay to buy Shabbos food. So when I heard that, I said to my son, something, I'm going to do something about this. I said, I will commit myself for the next 2 months to set up an account at this grocery, at the supermarket. He has $200 every Friday or to draw from that. So I will give $2,000. Okay, that's what I made the commitment immediately. I told my son, I will give $2,000. I called up this person who's the guarantor, who's a wealthy guy. I said, his first name is Mark. I said, Mark, I'm your Rebbe. I taught you Gemara, I taught you Halacha, I taught you many things. Now I'm going to teach you, even though you're a philanthropist, you give tzedakah, I'm going to teach you to be sensitive, how to give charity. I said, something? You're a smart guy. You could receive and return diamonds for pennies. I said, I'm telling you what I'm doing. I said, look, you have a lot more money than I have. Much more. But it doesn't make a difference. This is an opportunity. And I want to teach you how to not pass on an opportunity. This guy is a first-class person. Unfortunately, he can't make ends meet. Doesn't even have money to buy Shabbos. I'm setting up an account to cover the next 2.5 months that he could have $200 on account that he could shop for Shabbos. I said, what are you doing? I'm doing this. It should be an inspiration for you that you should do. He says, Rabbi, I thank you. Not only am I going to do something, I'm going to raise money to really help this person out in a very significant way. That was my personal experience on Friday. That was a Friday conversation that I had. I think I did it really because I was touched by this person's lack, this person, unfortunately. But something? I didn't do it because what Hashem should repay me. That's not why I did it. But factually, what I did, I believe, based on the Zohar, it activated a dynamic that Hashem will do chesed with the world. He's my children who are need a chesed themselves. They do chesed. I am the master of everything. I shouldn't do chesed. So it comes in multiples, beyond multiples. And that's the way we have to see things. And I'm always sharing it to touch you people. That there are opportunities that people, they're penny wise and pound ton foolish. Literally. I'll tell you a story many years ago in Israel. Again, pays even when I went over 10. It's pays to tell you the story. Many years ago, my third son studied in Israel. And there was a certain person who lived in a certain community in Yerushalayim. It's called Ezra's Torah. This person originally was from Chicago. Today, this man is in his 80s. And in those years, he came to Israel in the 50s to study from Chicago. And he's living in Ezra's Torah. The story goes back 28 years ago. And what does he do? There's 70 families in his community who are very poor. He goes to the market every Thursday, to the vegetable vendors, the fruit vendors, and all the fruit that's left over, he makes food baskets for the poor people and gives them baskets for Shabbos. Fruit, vegetables, bread, raises a little money. And my son was one of the delivery boys. Thursday night, 10, 11 o'clock night, he would knock on the door, just leave the package in front of the house, walk away. That's it. But the community, these people knew this person was the one who was putting it together. Okay? So my son calls me up and tells me what he does. I said, my son's name is Meir Simcha. I said, Meir Simcha, you know something? The way I see it, we can mine diamonds for pennies. The story goes back 28 years ago. So I went to one of my Talmidim. I said to him, I'm not going to mention what his name. I said, I want to tell you, we can mine diamonds for pennies. Instead of this person going to vegetable vendors with picking up the dregs of what's left over, we could really give these people something very substantial, respectful. I said, if you give me $25,000 twice a year, these people will really be treated well. So for many, many years, twice a year, I got $25,000 to help these families. He didn't have to go to eventual vendors any longer to get the dregs of what was left over to help these people. So I said, this person, we're mining diamonds for pennies, literally. Okay, listen to the story. Afterwards, somebody else took it over. And this was going on for I'd say for 24 years, 25 years. And then we added money. These people they couldn't afford shoes for their children, glasses for their dental work for their children. And we kept adding that he should be able to give them more to be able to, they should live as normal human beings. Then it went dead because this person fell on hard times, he had reversals, and I couldn't give the man any more money. So we went from whatever it is to nothing. And he had to do his own fundraising, whatever it was, okay? I get a call from a woman who's a student of mine from many years ago, and she's a wealthy woman, anonymous. And she said to me, Rabbi, I'd really like to do something for the holidays. What would you do for me? So I said to her, and she ready, I'm involved with many things in Israel, many things. With a certain rabbi who's a part of a community, most of the children are Sephardic children. It's a high school. And it's down south in Israel. And he says to me, he calls me up. It was before Purim. Most of the kids in this school, about 100 boys, they've never worn new clothing in their lives. Not outer clothing, not undergarments, not socks, not shoes. Everything they have is hand-me-downs. Could you imagine? That's how poor they are. It may be the third hand-me-down. That's the parents haven't bought suits in years. Very poor community. So I said to this person, I said, if I get you $25,000, what could you do with $25,000? $25,000 is, I could go, I have a relationship with a person who imports suits to Israel. He will give me the suits at cost. His cost, he will not make a penny on the suits. And he will give me outfit all these kids without making a penny profit. I said, you know something? In addition, I will give them food for Pesach, to put food on the table they've never had before. And in addition, I'll give incentives that if they study more, they will get financial prizes. They should have money in the pocket for spending money. I gave $25,000. This woman gave me the $25,000. When we say that the joy of that holiday was at a level, the parents had new suits, new hats, new shoes, the kids, you can't imagine the joy, okay? So she calls me up now before Sukkot and says, Rabbi, what could you do? And then she says, what else could you do for me? Then I said, there's another community I'm very involved in this. It's called Netivot. That's where the Baba Sali lived. I said, the poor people there. I said, if you give these special families, and they're not small families, $1,000 each family for the holiday, you will make a holiday for them that they never experienced in their lives. She says, you got $50,000. Yeah, she gave me $50,000. Each family received $1,000 for Pesach. Each family, okay? She calls me up now for Sukkot, says, Rabbi, what could you do for me? I said, do you want to repeat what you did last time? So we gave another $25,000 for the school for these kids, for these 50 families. She says to me, Rabbi, what else could you do for me? What else? I said, there's this family in Ezra's Torah, which I used to help. I haven't been able to help them for the past 5 years. And the 70 families, special families, some of the children are handicapped. They have nothing. So she says, what do you want? I said, I want $100,000. You give me $100,000, you're going to put these people in a position that they don't have to worry about tomorrow's food, where tomorrow's meal is coming from. She gave me $100,000 for these families. I'm telling you, tip of the iceberg. And there were other things, many other things. You know what this is? Well, that's what a person puts $1 in that stock box. I'll write you a $15 check, a $10 check. You have to be meritorious to have an appreciation to do these things. Well, she has the money. A lot of people have a lot of money. But you have to be fortunate to appreciate something to be able to do something so special. And when Hashem sees this is like sending off a mega bomb that the fallout positively touches every part of this existence. But who ignited that bomb? What was the igniter? This person was the igniter. That's the way you have to see things. Everybody should be well, and we should all be inspired by these stories.